OnePlus has built a name for itself on the backs of powerful, feature-rich phones that just cost loads less than the competition, to the point where that focus on value has become part of the brand's identity. But things are starting to change, and here's the proof. This is the OnePlus 8 Pro, a device that performs very nearly as capably as the best devices I've tested so far this year. And I also have to point out that OnePlus has also embraced standard flagship features that it never bothered with before. But all of that progress comes at a price. The base level 8 Pro with 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage starts at $900, and for $1,000 you get the fully kitted out model with 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. The price advantage that OnePlus has relied on for so long has basically evaporated, which leaves us to ask the question, well, what is the company giving us in return? Well, speed. Speed is everything to this phone. Now, normally when we talk about how fast a smartphone is, we'd start with the overall performance stuff, how fast the chipset is, what it's like to play games on this thing. This time though, I think we need to start with the most immediately impressive part of this device, its screen. This is a 6.78-inch Quad HD Plus display, and guys, it is beautiful. Viewing angles are excellent, and colors just look spot on, which I guess is not a huge surprise because Samsung made this screen. More importantly, it refreshes at a rate of 120 Hz. That makes almost everything look smooth here. The only exceptions are really games that haven't been updated to support this new refresh rate, but the ones that do look phenomenal. The difference in the fluidity between this screen and the 90 Hz display used in last year's OnePlus 7 Pro is definitely noticeable, so you can imagine how this thing looks next to an iPhone. The difference is night and day, and I know this video really isn't doing the screen any favors, and for that matter, that a lot of people probably could care less about how quickly their screens refresh, and that's all fine. All I can say is that after using the Galaxy S20 Ultra and now this, I don't want to use a slower screen, and I'm sure a lot of you would wind up feeling the same way too. While we're talking about rival smartphones, the OnePlus 8 does share another unsung feature with the Galaxy S20. These phones check for touch inputs on the screen faster than most phones by far. We're talking 240 times a second, which means there's virtually no lag between the moment you put your finger on the screen and the moment the screen starts reacting to it. The response is so immediate that it almost feels like you're pushing around physical objects instead of pixels on a screen. So yeah, this is a great display. It's one of the nicest I've ever looked at, and I would easily put it up there with the rest of Samsung's best. But it still drives me batty sometimes. That's for a few reasons. For one, the edges of the display kind of cascade down the sides of the phone, which means my hand meat just keeps touching it by accident. Misclicks happen all the time. It's not pleasant. So if you've run into that kind of problem with other devices, you're probably going to have the same issue here. Speaking of screens and design, you've probably noticed that OnePlus also went with a hole punch display instead of the kind of weird but cool pop-up selfie camera it used last year. We'll get to camera stuff later, I promise, but I know a lot of people who bought the OnePlus 7 Pro because that pop-up camera gave us a full, unadulterated edge-to-edge screen. Even I, a person who doesn't mind notches or hole punches at all, thinks that approach was better. For what it's worth, OnePlus said that not everyone liked that pop-up camera, and by getting rid of it, they were able to make the 8 Pro slimmer and lighter, which it definitely is. It's a noticeable difference from the 7 Pro from last year, but it is still kind of disappointing to see OnePlus go with a more conventional screen configuration because it gave us something so funky and out there last time. Another addition might be just as divisive. OnePlus added a custom motion estimation, motion compensation chip here that basically enables a feature that tries to make videos running on apps like YouTube and Amazon Prime Video and Netflix look smoother than they actually are. It's a gutsy idea, I guess, but one that doesn't really do it for me. It takes a little while to kick in, and when it does, it's a lot like watching a TV with that really awful motion smoothing feature built in. I have to assume that someone out there likes this feature because TV makers keep building it into stuff, so if that's you, you're gonna have a lot of fun here, but the rest of us should just leave this thing off. There is one issue that I wish I could dodge as easily as that thing. When the 8 Pro's screen is on, the in-display fingerprint sensor works beautifully, but when it's off, which will be the case a lot of the time, it is very flaky. I can't tell you how many times I've sat here, put my finger on the phone, waited for it to unlock, tried again, waited more, and nothing. OnePlus says it's aware of the issue and is going to release a fix for it, but for a phone so focused on speed, this feels like a pretty noticeable roadblock right out of the gate. Once you get past that though, you're basically golden. I mean, it goes without saying the OnePlus 8 Pro is a tremendously fast phone. There is an octa-core Snapdragon 865 chipset here, and no pretty game, no contrived multitasking scenario, nothing I threw at it over my days of testing could even make it stutter. But the same is also true of every other A65 phone we've tested this year. I don't think most people in their day-to-day lives are going to come close to pushing phones like this to their limits. As apps and Android become more complex though, you'll be grateful for that headroom, but for now, just enjoy what feels like rock-solid performance. It's also worth noting that the 8 Pro uses LPDDR5 RAM, which promises faster speeds with less of a hit to battery life. Now, the 8 Pro does have pretty solid battery life, which we'll get to, but it's kind of impossible to say how much of that is because of the RAM. I think the bigger concern here is how much RAM you actually need. The 8 gigabytes that come in the standard model, it's probably fine, especially when you factor in features like RAM Boost, which move apps that you use frequently into system memory. But if you're coming from like a OnePlus 5T or some older phone, or if you just don't like the idea of frequent phone upgrades anyway, the 12 gigabyte model is almost definitely the way to go. The company's obsession with speed also extends to network connections. The OnePlus 8 Pro supports Wi-Fi 6, which I'm sure is great news for all 12 of you out there who have Wi-Fi 6 capable routers. On the flip side, some of you might see better performance at public hotspots as the companies that manage them more fully embrace Wi-Fi 6, but it seems like kind of a moot point since we're all kind of stuck indoors now anyway. You'll also get full 5G speed on the OnePlus 8 Pro though. Full 5G speeds on T-Mobile, which I've been testing the phone on, aren't dramatically faster than LTE. That's just how things are though. It will get better in time, but most of you probably won't notice a huge difference in how fast your day-to-day downloads go. As companies continue to lure us into buying $1,000 phones, yes, speed remains hugely important. But let's be clear, you could make the fastest phone in the world and it would still bomb if your software stunk. Your preferences might vary, but I happen to think OnePlus did a great job with the 8 Pro software. It leaves a lot of Android 10 untouched and mostly just adds extra settings and features. Of note, there's a new system-wide dark theme that you can customize with different accent colors and fonts, and Zen mode is back for when you want to lock yourself out of your phone for 20 minutes so you don't have to read any more depressing news. There are plenty of other under-the-hood tweaks here and hyper-specific tools, but they all live just far enough beneath the surface that if you just wanted to go about your life using a clean, elegant build of Android, you can do that just fine. Now, honestly, I was expecting OnePlus's obsession with speed to really take a hit on battery life. Thankfully, the 8 Pro handles itself pretty well in this department. On days of consistent use, you'll get about 12 hours out of the 8 Pro's 4,510 milliamp hour battery. That's with the screen running at 120 Hz, but at the standard full HD resolution. If you wanted to go all out and run things at Quad HD and at 120 Hz, you can, but expect to take a hit in battery life. The inverse is also true. If you need to conserve power, you can drop things to full HD and 60 Hz, and that should give you a little bit more runway to work with. Frankly, I would have preferred if OnePlus just squeezed a bigger battery in here and just let us not worry about this at all, but it did try to make up for things by including a 30-watt warp charger, which will get your phone from bone dry to about half full in around a half hour. Throw in 30-watt wireless charging, which is a first. A first. Really, it took you this long? A first for OnePlus phones. And we're left with a phone that charges almost as fast as it runs. With OnePlus phones though, there's always been a caveat. The cameras have never been that great, but even that is beginning to change. OnePlus's approach here is a little odd and certainly less than perfect in some ways, but overall I think we're looking at some pretty big improvements. The star of the show is this main wide camera. It's a 48 megapixel sensor that's made by Sony. It's got optical image stabilization and an f1.78 aperture. Bear in mind, you're not going to be shooting at 48 megapixels most or even any of the time. By default, it bins down to 12 megapixels, which effectively means that the pixels that gather light on the sensor are bigger than they'd normally be. And I'm being a little reductive, but the point is OnePlus's main camera here is working with a strong foundation. Now, because of everything going on right now, I haven't been able to spend that much time outside shooting, but the shots I did get though were really promising. It helps that the camera focuses really quickly. In general, colors were really nice and accurate. I noticed a specific improvement in how it handles red and orange, and there's a lot of detail there to be found too. It's clear that this is the camera that OnePlus paid the most attention to, and I think that all paid off. I would happily carry the 8 Pro around as my daily driver for this camera. The other cameras are a little more interesting. The ultra-wide camera actually uses the same 48 megapixel sensor as the OnePlus 7 Pro's main camera, and it too defaults to shooting at 12 megapixels. I didn't notice any distortion around the edges, and that's a distinct plus, but you'll definitely see a dip in detail and changes in white balance as you switch between this ultra-wide and the standard camera. Still, it captures a pretty healthy 120 degrees of whatever's in front of you, so if you're for some reason out there and you happen upon a sweeping vista, this thing will do the job just fine. If there is one notable miss here, it is the telephoto camera. Now, I've managed to get some decent shots with it, but there is one big caveat. This thing doesn't actually use optical zoom. OnePlus markets this as an 8 megapixel camera, but that's not technically true. It's a 12 megapixel camera that crops down to 8 megapixels, which the company says gives you lossless 3x zoom. That is a bit of a stretch. The results are usable at 3x zoom, but the overall lack of detail makes them really unsatisfying. If you feel like you really need that range though, you can push in as far as 30x, but just do yourself a favor and walk closer to whatever you're shooting, if at all possible. Everything after 3x zoom is digital, so the results are just about as ungreat as you would expect. There is one more camera here that, for whatever reason, OnePlus kind of didn't want to talk to me much about. It's a 5 megapixel color filter sensor that lets you shoot with some neat color effects. So if you want photos with a bit more saturation, or if you want pops of color surrounded by black or white, this is the camera you'll want to use, but honestly, I'm not sure what practical purpose this serves. There are a few more things about the cameras I should note. The front-facing selfie camera works well enough, but you're going to look pretty soft in anything but ideal light, and there is a macro mode that can be very helpful if you're into taking incredibly tight shots. I wouldn't say it's necessary all the time, because the main camera does a pretty good job when you're pushed up right up against a subject, but the extra processing does help bring out some finer details. At the end of it all, the OnePlus 8 Pro certainly isn't perfect, but I can't help but be charmed by its blend of a fantastic screen and great performance and really well thought out software and even solid battery life. I just don't have that much to complain about. Yes, the camera could be a little less weird and the color camera could not be there, and the fingerprint sensor could work a little bit more reliably, but I do take OnePlus at its word that that will be fixed soon. It used to be the OnePlus phones were great because of the price, but the OnePlus 8 is proof that it can play in the top tier just as well as Samsung and everyone else. That doesn't mean they're going to stop making cheap phones. There is the cheaper OnePlus 8, which we'll get to in another review, I promise. All told, OnePlus has earned its place in the highest echelons of smartphone makers, and for that, it's definitely worthy of your attention. Well, that was our OnePlus 8 Pro review. Thank you as always for supporting us and for watching. Things are a little weird here in New York, but we're getting by. I hope that you guys are doing well too. Please be safe, stay healthy, and stay tuned for next time.